There's a name most Christians have never heard in their entire lives. For a group of early believers, this name mattered more than almost any other word in existence. Not Jesus, not Mary, not even God, the way you probably picture God. The name is Barbello. Say it slowly. It sounds like a password to something forbidden. And honestly, that's not far off. For centuries, this name was buried, called heresy, quietly removed from the story of Christianity you were taught in school or church. But it survived, in the sand, in clay jars, in the Egyptian desert, waiting almost 2,000 years to be found again. The first time I read about Barbello, something shifted in me. It didn't feel like new information. It felt like discovering a hidden room in a house I thought I already knew. By the end of this video, you'll understand who Barbello really is, why early Gnostic Christians believed she came before almost everything else, and why I think this is one of the most powerful, most misunderstood ideas in religious history. Stay with me. If I told you God had a first thought, a single moment of self-awareness before the universe existed, would you believe me? That's the simplest way I can describe Barbello. She isn't a goddess competing with other deities. In the texts that describe her, Barbello is something stranger and more beautiful than that. She's the first emanation of the invisible spirit, the Divine Mother, the first self-reflection of a God so far beyond human understanding that early Gnostics refused to even name it. Barbello is what happens the instant that unknowable source becomes aware of itself. Sit with that. Before Barbello, there is no story, no characters, no creation, just silence stretching in every direction forever. Then something happens. Awareness. A first thought. That thought is Barbello. This comes primarily from the Apocryphon of John, a central text of what scholars call Sethian Gnosticism. Historian Karen King, a respected scholar of early Christianity and Gnostic literature, has spent years unpacking how central Barbello actually was to certain early Christian communities. Here's my honest opinion. Barbello was too powerful an idea for the early church to let survive. A divine feminine force present before creation itself doesn't fit neatly into a story built around one all-male hierarchy. So she was pushed out quietly until almost nobody remembered her name at all. But you're about to. Before you understand what Barbello did, you need to understand what didn't exist yet. That's harder to picture than it sounds. Try imagining true nothingness. Not empty space. Space is still something. Not darkness. Darkness implies light could exist. I mean total absence. No time. No thought. No division between this and that. Gnostic cosmology starts here, with what's often called the invisible spirit, or the monad, a source so far beyond ordinary existence that the Gnostics refused to attach normal words to it. Not male, not female, not really a being, the way you or I use that word. Scholars call this apophatic theology, describing God only by what God is not, because any positive description limits the infinite. You can't call it big, because big implies something small to compare it to. It simply is beyond category, beyond language. I find that strangely comforting. Most traditions rush to describe God in human terms: Father, King, Judge. The Gnostics did something braver, in my opinion. They admitted the true source was too vast for any word to hold. But here's the question that changes everything. If this invisible spirit rests in total, unbroken stillness, what happens the moment it becomes aware of itself? What happens when nothingness thinks? Picture this with me. There is no light yet, no sound, no up, no down, because those words require space, and space doesn't exist here. There is only the invisible spirit, resting in a stillness so complete that even the word stillness is too small for it. This is before. Silence beneath silence. Then something happens that has no beginning, because time hasn't started. The invisible spirit turns its attention, if you can even call it attention, toward itself. It looks inward, into its own infinite depth, and for the first time, something exists that can be called a reflection. That reflection has a name. Barbello. In the Apocryphon of John, lost for nearly 2,000 years until it resurfaced among manuscripts discovered buried in a sealed jar near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in 1945, Barbello is described as the first thought, the forethought, of the invisible spirit, the Divine Mother Father, the perfect image of the source that produced her. She isn't created the way you or I understand creation, with hands shaping clay. She emerges. She unfolds. She is what happens when the infinite becomes capable of knowing itself. And in that instant, existence quietly begins. Notice something here, because it's easy to rush past. This isn't a story about a god making a servant. This is a story about self-awareness itself being treated as sacred. The first act in Gnostic cosmology isn't building, it's knowing. To me, that says something enormous about how these early Christians understood divinity. Not power first, not authority first, consciousness first. Barbello doesn't just exist near the beginning. In a real sense, she is the beginning of everything that can be called something rather than nothing. Sit with that, because it's about to get even more layered. This is the part that genuinely made me rethink what I thought I understood about the word God. In many Gnostic texts, Barbello isn't just a daughter or a creation. She's called the Mother Father, the first human, the invisible spirit's own perfect forethought, sometimes described as containing a fullness beyond simple male or female categories entirely. I want to be honest about why I find that striking. A lot of ancient religious systems put the feminine somewhere secondary, a helper, a supporting character. Barbello isn't written that way. She's the first self-expression of the divine source itself. Not beneath it, an extension of it, so complete that some texts describe her as containing everything the invisible spirit is, in a form that can finally be known. Think about that relationship. The invisible spirit is unknowable, beyond thought, beyond language. Barbello is what makes that unknowable source knowable. She's the bridge between the formless and the formed, between silence and the first word. That makes her one of the most important theological ideas most people have never encountered. Before there can be any relationship between the divine and anything else, there first has to be a moment where the divine becomes capable of relating at all. Barbello is that moment given form, and from her, everything else begins to unfold. Honestly, this is where people usually give up on Gnosticism. Too many strange names, too many layers. I'm going to slow this down, because the idea underneath is beautiful once you see it. Once Barbello exists, something remarkable happens. Through her union with the invisible spirit, new beings emerge called Aeons. An Aeon isn't quite a person, and isn't quite a place. Think of it as a dimension of divine consciousness given its own identity, mind, truth, reason, life, often appearing in paired opposites. Together they exist within the Pleroma, a Greek word meaning fullness. Here's how I picture it, in my own words. Imagine the mind of God gradually becoming aware of every quality contained within it, thought, truth, life, and each quality becoming vivid enough to exist almost like its own being. That's the Pleroma. Not a physical place, but a realm of complete divine self-awareness, unfolding outward from that first moment of Barbello's emergence. I believe this family tree of divinity is really a map of consciousness itself expanding, not just a myth about gods having children. It describes how a single point of thought can ripple outward into infinite complexity, every part still tracing back to one origin. But not every part of that divine family stayed in harmony. One Aeon, the youngest of them all, was about to make a decision that would change everything. This is where Gnosticism stops being pretty and starts feeling painfully real. Among the Aeons was one named Sophia, meaning wisdom. She was young, curious, longing to understand the invisible spirit directly, the way Barbello did. But every Aeon existed in balance with a partner. Creation was meant to happen through that balance, never alone. Sophia didn't wait. Driven by a longing achingly close to what you and I feel when we want to understand something bigger than ourselves, she acted alone, attempting to bring forth something new without her partner beside her. What emerged wasn't whole. It was flawed, a being often called Yaldabaoth, blind to the true divine source above him, arrogant enough to believe himself the only God in existence. This flawed being becomes, in Gnostic cosmology, the force shaping the material world you and I live in, imperfect, shadowed by ignorance of the light it came from. Sophia, overwhelmed by grief at what her isolated act produced, is cast outside the Pleroma, exiled from the fullness she once belonged to. Here's where Barbello re-enters, and this part moves me every time. As the Divine Mother, Barbello doesn't abandon Sophia to that exile. Several texts describe compassionate action connected to Barbello and the higher Pleroma, ensuring Sophia isn't lost entirely, that a path back toward the light remains possible, for her and for the divine fragments now trapped in Yaldabaoth's world. I'll be honest about why this hits differently than most creation myths I've studied. Most want you to believe the world was made perfectly, and that anything broken is your fault. This one doesn't. It says the world came from a mistake, a longing acted on too soon, and that even divine beings can stumble before they're ready. That feels more honest to me than almost any other origin story. It doesn't pretend brokenness isn't real. It just insists brokenness isn't the end. This is the part that got real people labeled heretics. As Christianity grew into an organized institution during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, church leaders worked to establish one unified set of beliefs. Anything that didn't fit was treated as dangerous. Texts describing Barbello, the Pleroma, and Sophia's fall fell directly into that category. One influential critic was Irenaeus of Lyon, an early Christian bishop whose writings against what he called heresies helped shape Orthodox Christian doctrine. To him, this cosmology wasn't just unusual. It was a threat to the entire structure he was building. So these texts were suppressed, copies destroyed, communities holding these beliefs pushed to the margins, then largely erased from mainstream memory. For nearly 1700 years, Barbello existed only as a footnote in the writings of the people who opposed her followers. Then in 1945, everything changed. Near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, a farmer discovered a sealed clay jar buried in the sand. Inside were leather-bound manuscripts, hidden, some scholars believe, to protect them during a period when possessing such texts had become dangerous. Among them was the Apocryphon of John, and with it, the fullest surviving account of Barbello's story. I think about that discovery often. An idea considered dangerous enough to bury in the desert, surviving quietly for 2,000 years, waiting to be found again. My honest take, suppressed ideas don't survive by accident. They survive because they touch something true people can sense, even when told not to look. Barbello wasn't erased because she was meaningless. She was erased because she mattered. Here's why I'm telling you all this. Not for a history lesson. I think it says something about you. Strip away the ancient names and look at the core idea underneath. The universe, in this cosmology, doesn't begin with matter. It begins with awareness, a single moment of self-reflection. Barbello exists because the invisible spirit turned inward and, in that instant, knew itself. You do that every day, whether you've thought about it this way or not. Every time you become genuinely aware of your own thoughts, not just running on autopilot, you're echoing that same original movement this cosmology calls sacred. I believe that's why this myth has survived quietly for so long. It doesn't just describe something that happened once. It describes something happening inside you right now, whenever you actually pay attention to your own mind. Some modern spiritual thinkers describe Barbello almost as a symbol for the divine feminine principle within human consciousness, the part of you capable of reflection and creativity, not just reaction. If the first act in the story of everything was self-awareness treated as sacred, maybe your own quiet moments of noticing your own mind deserve more respect than you've been taught to give them. That's not a small idea. It's the kind that can quietly change how you move through your life. So here's where I want to leave you. Barbello was never meant to be forgotten. She was buried deliberately by people who understood exactly how powerful this idea was. And she came back anyway, pulled from the sand almost 2,000 years later, waiting the whole time. I think that says something about ideas worth protecting. The true ones have a way of surviving, even when everything seems built to erase them. You now know a name most people never will, and why I believe it still matters today. Not as trivia, as a mirror held up to your own capacity to know yourself. Before anything existed, before light, before a single word was spoken, awareness turned inward. That was enough to start everything. Not force, not conquest, just a mind coming to know itself. If you want more of this, the buried, the suppressed, the deliberately erased, subscribe, because this isn't where the story ends. Sophia's fall deserves its own full telling, and so does Yaldabaoth, the flawed god she accidentally created. For now, just sit with this. Somewhere, in a story almost lost to time, existence began the moment awareness looked inward and recognized itself. Maybe yours does too. I'll see you in the next one.